Hello. My name is Ramon Valdez. If you've been here before, welcome back. If you're brand new to the channel, thanks for showing up. Now, this video is basically two parts. The first part is about this weak inferior throat plate that comes with your slider, and most sliders have this problem. Here's one that I make and sell. You can see how much more substantial it is. I ship these all over the world, and I stay busier than a one-armed drummer trying to keep up with orders. Now, if you think these are pricey, let me just tell you, these are tremendous value. I put loads of effort and time into making these. They're beautiful, they fit really well. The function and what you get out of them, you will be surprised if you haven't used a proper zero clearance insert before. But with a proper fitting zero clearance insert, your saw is going to be way more enjoyable to use and just safer in action, yeah? In the first part of this video, I'll show you how to extend the kerf for accommodating a riving knife and an easy way to cut a slot or kerf for the scoring blade. Now, if you're here just for the tips on making your K3 or similar saw better, you can fast forward toward the end of this video. I have a chapter titled Simple Modifications. Now, if you're watching this video before you have purchased one of these, make sure that you check the length of your opening. It must be 22 and 13/16 long. That's 579.4 millimeters, or else it just won't fit. Also, before you take your blade off or any of that, cut yourself a board. I like to make this about 24 inches long. It's just a little bit longer than this. 600 millimeters square, true it up, right? And we're going to attach this with the two screws that I provide.
All right, let's begin by removing your ridiculous factory insert, more like a throat plate. Or in my case, I'm going to remove my zero clearance insert, which is years old and still functioning perfectly. All right, now we bring the carriage all the way back and we can open the access cover. This may be different on yours. This is the Hammer K3. But essentially what I'm doing is removing the riving knife and then locking the riving knife mechanism back in place. On this particular saw, I have to unlock the scoring blade adjustment and then drop it all the way down. Of course, the main blade is dropped all the way down as well. If your saw has a scoring blade, you'll want to mark on the cast iron about the center of the blade. Get as close as you can. We'll then transfer that location to the bottom area and add some blue tape or masking tape. Sometimes I'm too lazy to use a hex key, so I'll use a hex driver in a drill, but reduce the clutch all the way to its lightest setting, just so I don't strip that hex drive. All right, the carriage is moved back once again, and we can close the cover, access cover. Actually, before you close the cover, make sure that your main blade and scoring blade both miss that insert. You could easily break a belt if your scoring blade's against that zero clearance insert. Here you can see I'm raising the blade until it punches through. Incidentally, I use an old dull blade that I'm going to be sending off to get sharpened. There's Formica on the bottom of this insert, Formica on top, adhered with epoxy. That stuff is hard, and it's hard on your blade. Use a dull blade. You'll be glad. Of course, the goal here is to just kiss that blue tape. I actually went a little too deep. All right, now we're having fun. We're going to raise the blade as high up as we can and bring that squared up, trued up board right up to the left side of the blade. A clamp like this would probably work, but it tends to lift that board up. Let's find something else. Here's another option. These are my older clamps that I used to use, and actually sometimes I still use these. Yeah, and of course, sandpaper on the bottom for superb gription. And no, I'm not trying to sell you anything, but this is my preferred clamp of choice. So I sell a kit that has 2 threaded blocks, 2 nuts, and a pair of knurled knobs. The Craig clamps you can find online. I'll leave a link to all of this in the description. At this point, we can take the zero clearance insert in its regular orientation and rotate it 180 degrees, slip it over the blade. We're going to anchor that down. Now, I don't think this is exactly necessary, but it does help to line up those screw holes with these centering drift punches. Pre-drill, of course, be careful not to drill your slider. I provide a pair of number 14 by 1.25" screws. It's about 32 millimeters long. They take a number 3 Phillips driver, not a number 2. And don't give me crap about Phillips. I like Phillips. They work. If it's slipping, take that purse or that handbag off your shoulder, push harder, or you're pushing crooked. One of those two things are the only things that can make a Phillips head slip. Occasionally I'll have a non-magnetic driver and I just charge it with a magnet to keep that screw from falling off. Since we are screwing down in a location that has a void, if you over tighten it, you can twist that zero clearance insert. So just be aware of that, or add some shims, whatever it takes. Here you can see, just to make sure that that zero clearance insert was nice and flat and tight, I went ahead and used some wedges. Make sure that the blade spins freely, and then we can simply turn on the saw, back up to our mark, and then go forward, creating a longer kerf for the riving knife. This is an excellent way to create a longer kerf that's in line with what we just cut. I simply would not try to do this any other way. Don't try to hold this by hand and make a plunge cut. It's too dangerous. It could get away from you. Here are the measurements I use if I'm prepping for a 12-inch or a 300 millimeter blade. I'll share the measurements for a 10-inch blade later in the video.
Incidentally, I should have mentioned earlier, but this is for a 12-inch blade. I'm not going to cut an opening for a scoring blade because you can't use it with a 12-inch blade. But I like 12-inch blade for general work. It's a better cut, cleaner. It just makes sense to me. But for a 10-inch blade or 250 millimeters, we can use a scoring blade. We're going to cut this opening now. But the reason that you can't just plunge through that, well, a couple of reasons. A, if you try to plunge through with a scoring blade, you will probably break your belt. Now, the other reason is this won't plunge through. You can see that it wouldn't go through before hitting this shoulder. So we have to accommodate for that shoulder to allow this to go through. And it doesn't need much on the top, just maybe, a few millimeters. Typically when I'm using a scoring blade, I'm only cutting into the material a 32nd or 0.7 or 0.8 millimeters.
Remember the little witness mark we made? We need to know the distance from the center of that to one edge of the insert. But first, I'm going to set up this biscuit joiner. You can see I've got it on this sandpaper board, right? It's anchored down right to this board. Sandpaper keeps it from moving. Anyway, we need to know the distance that it'll create. And I've got it elevated, and you'll see why here in a bit. The biscuit joiner is set up to plunge full depth. We can make a test cut and then measure that distance. Here I can get an idea of that distance. My setup will be different than yours. For me, it's 30.4 millimeters or 1.19 inches. What I'm doing here is just marking the center of that kerf. And then we'll do the same thing. We'll get that measurement. For me, it's 19.4 millimeters or 3/4 of an inch. Super simple. We can subtract one from the other, and this will give us a value so that we can create a shim or spacer. And you don't have to be crazy accurate, but here I found a drill bit that will work, and I'm showing you in imperial first, then metric. We can add these drill bits, spacers, or shims, and then make another new test cut to check our distance. Notice how I did it at the end of this little block. That way it's just easier to check. And from this angle it looks off, but it was lined up pretty well. Of course, you'll need to find the center of that witness mark so you have a reference. To keep the insert stable and safe, I'm going to anchor it to a block of wood. With the insert secured, I can make my first cut. Then I can reduce that value by 1.5 millimeters or 1/16 of an inch, make another cut, then add to that value by 1.5 millimeters or 1/16 of an inch, and make my third cut. All right, perfect. You can see the main cut down the middle and then the two little shoulder cuts on the side. That's going to work great. It's not pretty, but it is effective. We need that clearance for the shoulders on the scoring blade. You can see how it protrudes plenty. Probably different ways to do this. I'd like to hear what you think. All right, not super critical, but here is a stopping point for the kerf if you're using a 10-inch blade, 250 millimeter blade with a scoring blade. And that stopping point at the front is 13/16 or 21 millimeters for either blade.
All right, got the zero clearance insert in. I've got a few tips for you for your hammer K3, or actually this would apply to mini sliders. So check it out. Oh, incidentally, if you buy one of my zero clearance inserts, you'll notice a little QR code. That'll take you to my website, Instagram, a lot of my different products. Help a brother out. Check it out. So on this end where this little cover is, I actually made this into a drawer front. Check it out. Yeah. And this is where I keep the 4 wrenches for the main blade and scoring blade. Of course, it has a little dude here, so it won't come out too far. I could put one on the other end, I just haven't, but yeah. Good storage solution in a small shop. And your wrenches are always handy. Let me slide this cover open. So this is where the riving knife goes, right? And originally, this had a nut. And it used a wrench to loosen that, and it worked. And then I thought I was being smart. I added a knob, and that actually was a little bit better. But I wanted to be able to make sure that that thing was torqued. That riving knife can be really close to a blade, especially if this is a 12-inch blade or a 300 millimeter. And you want to make sure that's tight. You don't want that blade hitting the riving knife. So I ended up finding this guy. I don't know if that shows up. Let me put some light on that. Right there. Yeah, man. Kip handle, right? And kip handles are awesome because first they have a nice long lever, so good leverage. And you can move this handle wherever you want. Been using that for a while now. Yeah, I love it. Scoring blade wrench, right? And I made a diagram. Of course, I've memorized this now, but this is your lock. This is your lateral side adjustment. And then, of course, this one is the height. And I just wrote it on there. Quick and easy reference. This has a magnet on it. This is my go, no-go jig, and I'll show you this here in a bit. Well, I can show you now. So this edge is in direct alignment with the left side of my blade. Let me move this forward. And so if I have a board that I need to cut and I can have an alignment here, let me grab this. Let me squeeze. And I'm trying to line up where it's going to cut. Of course, the front I can line up with the blade itself, right? I can see where it's going to cut. Back here, I'm kind of in limbo. I know it hangs over a certain amount, but this lets me know exactly where it's going to cut, and I can line my board up or my mark with this go, no-go jig. This was the first one I made. I put a magnet on it so I could set it to the cabinet side. This is a new and improved version, and this one is adjustable. You can see I can just loosen these and slide this as this changes, if it wears, if I accidentally cut it, if I'm using a different blade, you know, Your blades will change as they get sharpened. Anyway, this end, you make these big and then you slice it, and that reference is exact with the left side of your blade. Very handy. A bit more with the scoring blade wrench. I, of course, added a magnet so I can keep it handy. I use this a lot. And I have this, I believe it's a 4mm, and that's for these screws, right? Sometimes I put this in a drill or a gun. If I'm doing a lot of these, it just makes it quick and easy. Of course, you can set that clutch so you don't over torque those and jack them up. But I also wanted to be able to use it in this. Of course, this is not the same size, so I welded some nubs on here, pretty ugly, ground them down till they fit, slipped a magnet in here, and now I have that, right? Options, man. In the past, there would be times when I'd be changing this scoring blade. Let me raise that up a little bit. I've been wanting to cut a notch in here because when this is all the way down, you can't hardly get the end of the wrench inside that Allen or hex. Same, I guess. Anyway, it goes in there, then you have this wrench. A lot of times I would loosen that, and this machine screw would drop right down inside there. So, added a magnet. So when I take this loose and I remove that machine screw, it stays stuck to my Allen key. Oh man, magnets. All right, when I first got this saw, this funky bolt used to be a little bit annoying because when you thread it through here, there's a notch in it right here, and that notch engages with the riving knife, and then it draws in. Well, it had a heavy shoulder on it like this. I put a heavy chamfer on it right here. And now, here, let me just assemble this. I also added a castle washer or a star washer, interior star washer. That goes on there. And this goes in here. As I'm starting to tighten the knob, that castle washer will grab into the plastic. Flat washer on this side. That just allows this nut to tighten easier with less effort, if that makes sense. Now I can align that little gap, slip that in place, and as I tighten this, that bolt draws in because of that chamfer, and then the castle washer grips that plastic and tightens a lot easier. A lot of people leave this loose. This is beveled here, so your board would lift it, but I like mine just parallel to the bed. Anyway, yeah, big improvement, super easy. You may have one of these auxiliary crosscut fences, and of course it goes in this T-track, in this slot on the slider. This dude has to be out of the way. And the idea behind it, we loosen these quite a bit. This stop comes up, 90-degree stop. And slip this in. There's a bolt right here, and that will register a 90-degree angle. Let's see. This needs to be like that. Let me get that out of the way so you can see. There's that. That comes up. Of course, this is adjustable. This comes back. This portion goes forward like that, and then you can tighten these down. I don't really use this a lot. I find it a little bit awkward. I don't rely on this scale. And as a matter of fact, I do have, this is sort of a template. You can see this corner is 92 degrees. This one's acute at 88 degrees. And I will put this edge against my rip fence, and then I can just rotate this, those 2 degrees, whichever way, to make this particular cut. This is actually a cut I make a lot for my DF500 docks. I felt like this was, it would kind of slip and kind of awkward to tighten. So what I ended up doing, which actually helped quite a bit, let me slip this out. Added some sandpaper for better gription, right? And that really bites quickly, and you don't have to over tighten these knobs handles.
All right, here on the crosscut section, those kip handles at the front, those originally were knobs, and kip handles just work much better. Additionally, if I moved the crosscut attachment forwards and back on the slider, I would probably change these knobs to kip handles. But for the most part, this stays in this position most of the time.
Of course, a super incredible addition is this Tiger fence. The original fence was one of the things I really did not like about this K3. And just so you know, this Hammer K3 it's what I call an entry-level slider. But for a one-man shop, it does pretty well. With this thing, it makes it a good saw. This thing is accurate, smooth, and extremely repeatable. Check this out. Let's bring this over to 3 7/16. 3.4375. Of course, you can do metric, nickel test. Let's take this to 18 inches or whatever. 18. And that hum you hear, of course, you don't hear it when the blade's running. It's just the servo motors. We'll bring it back 3 7/16. 3.4375. Go. Boom. I love it. You've heard of stopping on a dime? Stopping on 2 nickels? Wait, yeah. Bad dad joke.
All right, here's a great overview shot from 12 feet up in the air. You can see the 2 saws at opposite corners of the outfeed table. This is a fantastic and very versatile setup if you have the space, and I barely do. The dimensions of that outfeed table are 5 foot by 8 foot, 60 by 96 inches. I did the math. It's 1,524 millimeters by 2438 millimeters long. That is it for this video, and I am positive that you are going to love your zero clearance inserts, or you do already. Thank you tons for watching.